Hello there, friends, fellow digital artists. My name is Eldar Zakirov, and here, finally, in this video, I'm gonna show you the painting process of a simple still life with the basic techniques of working in Procreate with my oil brushes. So here we go. So I'm starting with a rough sketch with one of the pre-drawing category brushes, just how the old masters did and many contemporary oil painters still do. Here, after blocking the main shapes, on a new layer I'm painting over the entire canvas with a transparent brownish tone. Try not to break off the stroke when covering all the canvas. For this layer, name it Pre-Color, I choose the linear burn as blending mode. I like it the most now, but it's not dogmatic. For every situation, for each anticipating tone, the mode might be different. And you can also work without any blending mode at all, just as you like. Okay, let's start adding colors to the painting. Going down the brush list, we get into the on-canvas category. These brushes are mainly on the next stage. It's convenient to apply primary strokes with them, and they still retain much of the canvas texture. You can start working from the background or main objects. In this case, it's a burger, or paint everything at once. Various methods and philosophies of work. Here I wanted to define the environment where I would set the central object. Therefore, I decided to paint over the background more or less first, and then I will start by working out how to determine the relationship between tones of shadows and lights of the central object and the background. With low pressure, most brushes mix their paint with the previously laid paint stroke or color on the same layer. With high pencil pressure, the stroke becomes more thick, opaque, and even impasto or thick paint-like, as an analogy with real oil paints. Here, I wanna show you as many brush presets at work as possible, so I'm gonna change them often, trying to demonstrate them and their behavior widely. It's convenient for me to call up the color sampling tool with index fingers, double tap on the Apple Pencil. However, you can simply tap the square icon on the left, between the sliders of the size and opacity of the brush adjustment. Let's move on to the burger. Here I will initially use a more carefully working brush, so as not to overpaint my pre-drawing prematurely. I'll define the shadows a little. Then I slightly modify the surrounding environment or entourage. And now we can move on to snatching a burger from the environment. I will define some basic relations between the bone color and background. And I'll add shadows on the connections with the light areas. In some places, I'm to enhance the background's contrast with the burger's future volume, so it will be better to rake it away from the background and farthest planes. And for modeling the upper band, I will immediately proceed to voluminous thick paint brush strokes to visually detach it from the background. Well-lit surfaces are especially in need of this. Now I'm gonna quickly run over the middle part of the bread. The canvas texture is accented here well, as if the brush was sliding on the tops of the canvas grains, coloring only them. A little later, I will put more voluminous thick paint brush strokes in the lights, but in some places, the texture of the canvas will remain. Try always to compare the color and tonal relations of different parts of your scene constantly. how shadows relate to lights, how one color in its lightness correlates with neighboring ones. If you're working from life, you can slightly close your eyes so the minor nuances will disappear, giving way to large, basic tonal masses. And this is my favorite brush, by the way. It's called Universal Detail and Filbert for a reason. This is because, in my opinion, it's suitable for almost any task. With a low press, it mixes colors as I said previously. And with a stronger one, it shows the texture of the brush, gives a more voluminous, thick trail, and a feeling of oil paint, I would say. By the way, fellows, I'm a supporter of the least minimal number of layers. So, if the work doesn't require placing objects on different layers initially, what is sometimes necessary for games, animation or compositing, for example, I prefer to reduce the layers quantity during my work process with a useful minimum. If I suddenly need to separate an object from the other ones, or the background, which happens extremely rare, then Photoshop selection tools, for example, are doing a good job with this now. However, this is not advice, I just mentioned my personal experience, my methods of work. Please note how, using the one and the same brush, you can get voluminous thick paint strokes in well-illuminated areas where needed to show the texture and materiality of the object. And at the same time, with the same brush, you can paint smooth blending tones in less lighted places, shadows and reflexes. A small, cool brush that makes the impasto effect intimidates both thick paints and mixes with varnish and oil. It's a pretty specific brush, but it gives good results when in its place. Another very favorite brush of mine, even a small group of brushes. With a stronger pressure, it behaves more filled with quite a liquid paint. And with a weaker press, it dries up a little, which is reflected in its title. I really like how it works, and I also use it for widest task number. Dear friends, I wanna draw your attention to the fact that I painted this study when I just worked on the first version of the set. So, some of these brushes are even younger than version 2.5. That's why some of the brush previews in this video may differ slightly from the ones in the lower right corner. In general, they are identical. Well, the next brush is related to the previous one. They are quite similar. I really love both of them, so I just couldn't leave only one in the set. They are both present at the end of the volumes category list. I use these brushes for wide flat strokes, especially for backgrounds, underpainting, studying and sketching. But also it fits, in my opinion, extremely fine for small details as well. However, it depends on the chosen technique and tasks. I consider it one of my most successful brushes, by the way. Well, for painting a slice of tomato, I use again that slightly denser brush. It reminds me of those real traditional short flat elastic brushes from cosmetics kits. Yeah, they were truly perfect for me to work with oil and acrylic paint. When I was starting a detailed elaboration in traditional media and made do fine with that short brush handles too. Well, this electronic Procreate brush is suitable for modeling medium and small, as well as large shapes. Here, to emphasize the shapes and volumes on this side of tomato slice, I use a brush from the impasto category, having a more evident, bumpy, thick paint stroke. These brushes are more suitable for showing the materiality of well-lit areas. And specifically, this brush allows you to get a short, clear side stroke when moving the Apple Pencil parallel to its axis. But okay. Well illuminated places, especially areas near highlights, all of them literally ask for more impasto, say thick paint, bumpy brush strokes. The current brush is perfect for this. I return to the volumes category to paint the middle lobe of the bone, nuance its shape. Such a shaggy brush will make it easier for me to blend in intermediate tones directly on the canvas. At the same time, it's quite pasty and embossed. The point is that we cannot even imagine what is light red, because it would be rather something like pink or peach shade, and they can no longer be called red. Photographers also know this, but in the shadows, the red color stretches pretty well. They're also poorly in coloristic relations. I mean, red is the most intense, flashy color, and it doesn't tolerate admixtures of additional colors. Shades of green, even bluish and purple on the red objects often look alien, because red literally outshines them in nature. And again, my favorite brush shows itself wonderfully on tiny details. That's how wonderful it allows to run over both a pickle and a slice of bread, drops of ketchup on the bone, and also the volume on the bone as well. In the set version 3, this brush has undergone some changes that have made it more convenient and versatile in the next update. It has become softer and more realistic. By the way, some of my works, for example a much more detailed one, titled Stinger, which depicts a richly decorated girl, is mostly done with this brush, from the set of version 2. It is modeling on the face, jewelry and almost all elements, except for rough, wide obvious strokes on the background. In fact, it's not necessary to change brushes so often. You'll likely find literally a few of them that best fit your tasks, your technique, your vision. By the way, I'm to remind you that many brushes, probably even the majority, behave somewhat differently when the pencil is tilted to the screen surface. They paint drier, become wider and often bumpier, depending on which brush it is, which category it belongs to. Among the artists working on oil painting techniques, some prefer to create a color mix on the palette and then put the shade on canvas. Others are more inclined not to mix the paints completely, creating a game of colors, shades and textures on the painting. or blending one shade into the previously laid one, mixing them already on the canvas with a brush. All these techniques are more or less implemented with the perfect oils brushes in Procreate. I would also add that all painters can be conditionally divided into those who prefer expressive opaque pasty brush strokes and those who love more glazing techniques, achieving smooth shade transitions using all the possibilities that oil paint provides. So all of the artists will find suitable brushes here, I believe. Well, let me also remind you that regarding most of the set brushes, low pencil pressure gives a transparent and blending wet paint effect, and a stronger press makes the virtual paint dense and thick. Once again, this applies to most brushes of the set, however, not for each of them. Here we use a thick painted brush with small gaps in its texture, as if you are sliding on a dried paint, or maybe on some bumpy textured surface. We change the brush to a more fluid, wet paint one. This is still a flat brush. It mixes paint well and allows you to put thick strokes of various widths. It's well suited for molding both large and small volumes. I purposely leave some areas with the texture of the canvas not painted over to preserve their texture and freshness of the work. Next, using glazing brushes, I'm gonna add volumes and additional shades to such areas without completely overpainting the brush-touched canvas grain. Well, I can use this preset in the parts where I want to put opaque or contrasting brush accents, as if laid with a flat bristle brush. Important: tilt the pencil along the moving direction using this one. By the way, the Master Kino brush is marked as lateral, have a similar principle of moving. That's important. Now, let's model the border of a lettuce leaf and the shadow under it a little. It seems for this area needs to add little lights and shadows, details, drop some modeling strokes to convey the corrugation of the lettuce leaf. And I'm gonna clarify the side of the cucumber a bit, and also get back a little again to the leaf, the surface of the bone, its side faces and protruding areas. Here we have more drops of ketchup playing in the rays of sunlight. And right here, we can paint off the torn away areas in some places, unifying them with the background, or on the contrary highlight and real preferred parts to pull them forward to the viewer. By the way, this is all done with my favorite brush. We do this using lights, glare and contrast. Choosing a brush. I titled this brush after the famous artist Nikolai Fashin. It resembles his painting technique using thick and dryish paint with a ragged convex stroke. This brush gives a sharp, turned, extremely bumpy and pasty stroke. At the same time, with pressure it rapidly changes to a wider one. This is a property of sharp and angular brushes. It's perfect for the final setting of the smallest highlights, as if on the tip of a bristle or round brush. Also, it works for thicker and accentuated brush strokes. Here I am, placing small light accents, even on the edge of the plate or a dish where the burger lays, and on the contrasting areas where the well-lit object touches the dark background on the outlines. Oh great! Of course, the advantage of digital art is that you can undo your actions if you don't quite like something, and not repaint all the parts of a whole art. So, in general, as you can see, the work already looks quite finished. But the best is the enemy of the good. That's why I decided to torment the picture a little with some brush touches. And torment you with my tutor a little. It's almost done, friends. And now, here we can fire up this light triangle, snatch it out by the sun right on the wall. It can, as it seems to me, help complete the composition and make a little more unusual than just a still life with the food. I will choose a more accentuated, noticeable brush with a slight manifestation of the canvas texture from the on-canvas category. In addition to the grain of the canvas with high pencil pressure, low pressure gives a bold, thick paint flat brush stroke, as if the brush was just slightly dipped in the not thinned paint from the palette. Let's add some pasty, ragged point bunches. Such an effect is obtained when you run over a bumpy hardened paint layer with a depleted brush containing a thick paint mix, and the paint lays on the convex areas on the surface, bypassing the concaves. These are all brushes from the lilac reliever category. Okay, let's rub the paint a little here and there with light touches of a palette knife until it has dried yet, just to add a bit of picturesque. Now I'll find the palette knife that suits me the most here. By the way, in version 3 of the set, there are more brushes that imitate palette knives, and they have become more realistic and similar to what you get by working with real palette knives. Please pay attention to the instructions they are offered for working with Masticino brushes. They are available in my Instagram, for example, why not? It describes the basic techniques of work. They are mostly according to pencil pressure changes and the direction of movement. Some palette knife brushes can reveal the canvas grain or the texture of paint laid over dried paint bumps, as the reliever category brushes do. Voila, that's what we got. Let the paint dry a few days and then get down to varnishing.